Our giving isn't about what we put in. It's about what we have left. I think most of the time we focus all of our attention upon what we do as we put money in. Like, how much am I going to give? What's the amount that I need to have, right? And yet, Jesus talks about the fact of, hey, there were some people, he noticed, they put in large sums. There was this widow who then just puts in a few cents. But what does he really note there? He notes about her and what she has left. So my wife and I sitting next to each other, and she is reading for the first time, second time. So for the second time, she's reading C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity, and she knows nothing about the sermon that's coming up. Did you? She knows nothing about the sermon that I'm developing. And so all of a sudden she just goes, this is crazy. Look at what he says here. And the quote, which I didn't put, if you want the quote, find my wife after service. But the quote was simply this, and it had everything to do with the fact that unless there is a sacrifice made in your giving, it really isn't giving. Is that about right? Pretty close. That our giving is supposed to cost us something, which is truly a principle within the New Testament, right? That following Jesus Christ is going to cost you. But what does he really note there? He notes about her and what she has left. So my wife and I sitting next to each other, and she is reading for the first time, second time. So for the second time, she's reading C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity. And she knows nothing about the sermon that's coming up. Did you? She knows nothing about the sermon that I'm developing. And so all of a sudden she just goes, this is crazy. Look at what he says here. And the quote, which I didn't put, if you want the quote, find my wife after service. But the quote was simply this, and it had everything to do with the fact that unless there is a sacrifice made in your giving, it really isn't giving. Is that about right? Pretty close. That our giving is supposed to cost us something, which is truly a principle within the New Testament, right? That following Jesus Christ is going to cost you. Cost you in relationships at times. Cost you at times at work. Cost you sometimes in what you are able to do at work and what you're not able to do at work. So sometimes the potential for making money is not as great. But it will cost you in some way, shape, or form. And so Jesus makes this point that it ought to cost you something. That, you're ready for this? It's not about giving some sort of percentage of your income towards the Lord. It's about thinking about, well, what do I have left after this? You see, our giving then also, thirdly, our giving then demonstrates trust. You know, I'm not going to say that you should give your last cent to the Lord this morning. All right? I don't even believe that that's the point that Jesus is making here in this passage. In fact, it might even be an indictment upon the religious leaders of that time, because this widow giving her very last cent would mean this, is that the system that God had put in place for her in the nation of Israel, well, it wasn't being met. That God's system wasn't being followed. That honestly, she shouldn't have been left with so little. But the religious leaders were not taking care of their own. They were taking care of just themselves. So this lady, though, this widow, she does give her very last cent. And for her, it just meant this. It meant that she had no means to be able to help herself out. It meant that she was placing her sole trust in the hands of God and just recognizing that God would come through. My guess is, it's not said, my guess is it's probably not the first time she's ever done that. Chances are that's the way she has been living her life, that she's not had much, but what she's given that to the Lord, but God has continued to meet her needs. Again, I don't know that I can totally relate to this widow, but I do know that in receiving God's blessings as I have, and I certainly, we've been blessed way before we ever needed to be blessed at times. You know, we get married, and I didn't have enough money for one person, okay? By the way, just in case there's some single guys out here, here's what you don't say. Just helping you, all right? You're welcome. So I went to ask permission, right, to marry Penny from her dad. And her dad asked a very logical question. I mean, I'm a college kid, have no money, pastor, going to be a pastor, not really known for making a lot of money either. And he goes, well, how are you going to provide for my daughter? All right, let me tell you what not to say. What not to say is, we're just going to live on love. That will not endear you to said father-in-law, but they love me today. They loved me as soon as they start having grandchildren. But, so maybe there was a few rocky years there, but again, live and learn sometimes. But I just know this, is that God has always provided for us. All of a sudden, we lived in the best house that we've ever lived in when we first got married. Somebody said, hey, listen, God is, we've just sold our business and we have to go and live a year in this other state. Would you guys, they didn't really need it, would you guys watch our home for us while we're gone for that year and take care of it? And don't worry about the utilities, that kind of sort of thing. We would have paid for those if we were there anyway. So all of a sudden, this just kept on getting better and better and better. And it was just crazy how God has taken care of us. So I can't really say much about understanding what this widow had done. But maybe you, like me, have seen God take care of you time and time again. And maybe it was in times of abundance, and maybe it was times of lean times, but God was there. And to be clear, our trust wasn't in our means and what we had, but it was in the very God that we knew. Not in some formula of how I can gain his support, but just recognizing that God was for me no matter what. And so for each of us, how do we give? And I just want to give you two simple ways in which we give, right? There's no formulas here, but two ways in which we give. And the first one is this, is that we give our best. We give our best. And I realize so many times maybe somebody else would tell you, hey, what you're supposed to do is give 10%. And certainly I see that over and over again in the Old Testament about tithing and about that being 10%. But honestly, in the Old Testament, if I really went by the Old Testament, it's really about 26%, if I get the numbers right there. So there were some other ways in which that you were supposed to give, in which that widow would have been taken care of as well. But with that is just the fact of I don't want us to think about what the percent is that I'm supposed to give. It's the fact that whether it's 1% or 10% or 50%, I grew up in a church where I had a deacon in the church, and his story was God just continued to bless him, and he's just like, you know what, my goal is to give away 90 and to just live on 10. And so every year he gave another percent. And surely last time I knew, he was well on his way to making it to 90. And so with that, it's just the fact of not about a percent of what we give, but just about placing God first in our minds and in our hearts, recognizing that it isn't just this this percent that I have to give, but it's the fact that I get to give. Let's say you have a rich uncle that leaves you millions of dollars, because certainly none of you would have played the lottery here and tried to win $1.2 billion. I mean, what would we do with $1.2 billion? Okay, what would you do with $1.2 billion, right? So all of a sudden you might say, man, my first thought goes to, man, that's a lot of taxes. All right, so maybe that's where you're at. Or maybe all of a sudden your first thought goes to, call the family, right? We're taking a trip, right? It's cruise time. I mean, I don't know what it is for you. Or all of a sudden it's like, whew, finally, I am finally going to pay off every single bill I have. What would that feel like, right? Have absolutely zero debts for some of you, right? Or all of a sudden it's like, for those of you still working, you're like, nope, not anymore. So tomorrow I'm calling in dead. And so, I'm not coming in anymore, right? I'm retired, right? What is your first thought? So many times, right? Our first thought reveals something about us. It reveals what's important to us. It reveals sometimes what we fear the most. So what's most important to us, what's our biggest fear? But when it comes to our resources, where is God in all of that? Shouldn't he be our first thought? In Genesis 4:3-5 it says this, in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Now, I know there's lots of different reasons why people think that Cain's offering wasn't as good as Abel's, but I want to draw out just something that I don't have to wonder about or say, could it be this or could it be that? I definitely know this certainly is a part of it in this passage, and it was just the fact that Cain brought some of what he had gathered from tilling the soil, but Abel brought the very best portions of his flocks, of the firstborn animal. That Abel brought what? He brought the very best. That God was his first thought in that. And Cain simply brought what was left over. And so God was on down the list for what the reasons for why he would bring something. And certainly you see this time and time again in the Bible. In Leviticus 23:10, it says, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. Numbers 18:12, I give you all the finest olive oil and all the finest new wine and grain, and they give the Lord as the first fruits of the harvest. Deuteronomy 18:4, you are to give them the first fruits of your grain, new wine and olive oil, and the first wool from the shearing of your sheep. First fruits was just the signal for bringing the very best, not the leftovers before God. It was thinking about, it was honoring God initially as you received the fruit of your labor. Because if you'll think about God in the initial phase, you'll probably keep focusing on God with the remainder as well. And even Jesus is referred to as a kind of first fruits in 1 Corinthians 15:20, that Jesus not only died in our place for our sins, but he was raised from the dead back to life. The very first, the best, the first fruits to move from death to life there in the resurrection. And therefore, you and I can be assured of our own resurrection, is what the big point there was. That we will not remain in our sin and death, but like Jesus be resurrected, that we are brought into a new life, eternal life, a life that will always be before the Lord. And so yes, when we give, we ought to give our very best.